Simone Reeves was 33 years old when she reached for her husband's phone to check the time on a turkey she'd been basting since 6 that morning. Douglas didn't stop her. He never thought to. On the screen was a message from a contact saved simply as V, the kind of message a wife doesn't misread twice. Simone didn't say a word. She set the phone down exactly where she found it and went back to the stove, because 18 of Douglas's relatives were waiting for dinner, and because some decisions are made in silence. What Douglas didn't know was that his wife had spent 6 years building his father's trust, one holiday dinner at a time, and that trust was about to matter more than he could imagine. An hour later, in front of the entire family, he would say 6 words that would seal his fate. But right now, standing at the counter with her hands still trembling, Simone was only beginning to understand what she'd found. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today, and if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The Reeves family estate sat at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It was the kind of house that had a name, Holloway Hill, printed on a small brass plaque by the front gate, as if the house itself needed to introduce itself before you even rang the bell. 3 stories of pale stone, black shutters, ivy crawling up the east wall. Snow had fallen the night before, just enough to coat the hedges and the wide front lawn, and in the gray morning light, the whole place looked like a Christmas card someone had designed specifically to make you feel small. Simone Reeves did not feel small. She felt tired, but that was different. She pulled her van, white, clean, with Whitfield and Table stenciled on the side in dark green, around to the back entrance and cut the engine. It was 7:42 in the morning. She had been awake since 4:30. In the cargo space behind her sat a full hotel pan of honey-glazed ham, a Dutch oven of her grandmother's collard greens, a covered tray of homemade dinner rolls still faintly warm from the oven, 2 sweet potato pies, 1 pecan, and a cooler holding the herb butter and dry brine she'd applied to the 18-pound turkey the night before. She had spent 3 days on this meal. 3 days, during the single busiest week her catering business ran all year. She climbed out, rolled her shoulders back, and opened the rear doors. This was what she did. She fed people. She did it with precision and care, and she did it well, and she had learned a long time ago that doing it well was the only thing that kept the noise of this family at a manageable volume. The kitchen at Holloway Hill was large and outdated in the way that expensive kitchens sometimes were. Heavy copper pots hanging from a rack nobody used, a 6-burner range that probably hadn't been calibrated in a decade. Simone noticed the uneven heat on the left burners within 3 minutes of lighting them. She adjusted without a word, shifting the stock pot to the right side, lowering the flame. By 8:15, the kitchen smelled like rendered fat and fresh thyme, and the faint, warm sweetness of brown sugar beginning to caramelize. 2 of Douglas's aunts drifted through, drawn by the smell, and stood in the doorway making appreciative sounds. "Simone, honey, this smells absolutely wonderful," said Aunt Carol, who was Patricia's sister and wore the same careful smile Patricia wore. "You are just so talented in the kitchen." "Thank you," Simone said, basting the turkey with easy strokes. "It'll be ready by 2. "I keep telling Patricia she should take a cooking class," Carol laughed lightly. "But then, not everyone grows up learning these things the way you did. It's a real gift, coming from that kind of background." Simone set the baster down. She kept her face pleasant. "It's a business," she said. "Whitfield and Table did $400,000 in revenue last year." A small silence. Carol blinked. "Oh, well, good for you." Patricia arrived in the kitchen at 9, dressed in cream wool, her silver hair set perfectly, a coffee cup already in hand. She surveyed the counter, the organized trays, the simmering pots, the rolls cooling on the rack, with the slow, measuring look of a woman inspecting something she hadn't ordered but would accept. "Everything looks very homey," she said. "That's the idea," Simone replied. Douglas's grandmother used to do a standing rib roast for Christmas. Patricia picked up the edge of the foil on one of the trays and looked beneath it. It was a whole production, But I suppose everyone has their own traditions. She smiled at Simone. Your mother teach you all of this? My grandmother, mostly, and culinary school. Right. Patricia waved a hand. Well, it's very practical what you do. She said practical the way some people said, bless your heart. Simone had noticed that years ago. Douglas came down at 10. He was unshaven, wearing a gray Henley, and he moved through the kitchen with the particular restlessness of a man who wanted to seem unbothered and wasn't quite managing it. He kissed Simone on the cheek, a quick, dry press, barely contact, and poured himself a coffee without asking if she needed anything. My father's coming down soon, he said. He wants to talk before everyone else gets here. That's fine, Simone said. I've got everything under control. You always do. He said it like a complaint. His father arrived at 10:30, and when Richard Reeves Sr. walked into the kitchen, he stopped and looked around the same way he probably looked at a quarterly report, methodical, assessing. That turkey ready by 2? He asked Simone directly, bypassing Douglas entirely. 2 o'clock, she said. He nodded once. You run a tight operation. He said it plainly, no decoration. To him, it was simply a fact. Your crew handled the Henderson account dinner without a single complaint from the client. I noticed. Douglas looked up from his phone. Dad, it's Christmas. Richard looked at his son the way you looked at someone who had just said something beside the point. Then he took his coffee and walked out. Douglas's phone buzzed against the counter. The sound was small, ordinary, but his hand shot out and covered it before Simone could glance over. A quick, practiced move. Too quick. He tilted the screen toward himself, read something, and the muscle in his jaw tightened the way it did when he was working to keep his expression neutral. Then he slid the phone into his pocket and straightened. I need to step out for a minute, he said. Not to Simone specifically, just to the air. He left through the side door, toward the hall. Simone stood at the stove. She turned the greens down to a simmer. She wiped her hands on the towel tucked at her waist. She did not follow him. She did not call after him. She simply stood there, in that big, warm kitchen, and let the thing she had just seen settle into the back of her mind, quiet and still, like sediment dropping to the bottom of a glass. Something was off. She didn't know what yet, but she filed it away, folded it neatly into the part of herself that noticed things, and she turned back to the stove. There was still a meal to finish. The afternoon light came through the kitchen windows in thin, pale strips. Simone had the oven timer in her head the way she always did on job days, a quiet, internal clock that tracked temperature and time without her having to think about it. But the turkey needed to be checked. The thermometer was on the counter near Douglas's side of the kitchen, and Douglas was sitting at the small breakfast table in the corner, scrolling with one thumb, not talking. Douglas? She didn't look up from the pot. What time is it? Nothing. Douglas. She wiped her hands on the towel at her waist and reached across the counter for his phone, which was sitting face up, unlocked, right there. The screen lit under her fingertips. 1 second. That was all it took. A text preview. The contact name was a single letter. V. And below it, 3 words she would not repeat to herself but understood completely. Simone's hand went still. The kitchen kept going around her. The greens were simmering. The oven fan ran its low, steady hum. Somewhere in the front of the house, a child was laughing, and Christmas music played softly from the living room speakers, something orchestral and bright. She set the phone back on the counter, exactly where it had been. She turned to the oven. She did not say anything. What she felt in those first few seconds was not what she would have expected. It wasn't the sharp, hot thing she might have imagined. It was more like the moment when you're carrying something heavy and you finally understand just how heavy it actually is. That slow, settling recognition, like her body had known before her mind caught up. V. She pulled the oven door open. Hot air rushed over her face, and she leaned in with the thermometer, pressed the probe into the thick of the thigh, and waited for the number. 162. 8 more degrees. 20 minutes, maybe 25. She closed the oven. She reset her internal clock. She thought, not here, not today, not in front of his mother's Christmas table. That decision cost her something. She felt it settle into her chest, a kind of weight, but she also felt, underneath it, something harder, quiet and solid and not going anywhere. She had fed this family for 6 years. She had loaded her van in the dark and driven to this house and cooked in this kitchen and absorbed every practical and every homey and every thinly wrapped slight Patricia had ever offered her. She had done it with a smile and clean hands and food that was, without exception, excellent. She was not going to give them a scene. She was going to finish this meal. She watched him after that. Not obviously, not the way that gets noticed, but she watched the way she always watched at a job, with her peripheral vision, with the part of her brain that tracked details automatically, the same part that noticed the uneven burners that morning, the same part that cataloged table counts and timing and what a client's face looked like when something was wrong. At 2:15, Douglas stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. At 3, he laughed at something on his screen, a short, private laugh he swallowed quickly when he noticed Simone looking. At 4, he offered to pour wine for his aunts and refilled his mother's glass twice and moved through the house with a looseness she hadn't seen in months. Comfortable. That was the word. He was comfortable. Not cautious, not careful, not even particularly discreet. Just comfortable. The way a man moved when he had decided the people around him weren't paying close enough attention. She filed all of it. Quietly. Methodically. The same way she had filed Aunt Carol's comment that morning. The same way she had filed Patricia's practical. The same way she had been filing things for years, stacking them neatly in a part of herself that she had never, until this afternoon, had any reason to open. "Everyone to the dining room!" Patricia's voice came from the hallway, clear and carrying, the voice of a woman accustomed to being heard. "Dinner is ready! Let's not let it get cold!" Simone heard the shuffle of movement, chairs scraping in the living room, the low murmur of conversation shifting direction, the sound of the family organizing itself into the shape Patricia wanted. She stood at the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on the towel at her waist. She looked at the last dish waiting to go out. Her grandmother's collard greens in the good serving bowl, steam still rising from the surface, the smell of them warm and deep and real, in a way this house had never quite been. She picked up the bowl. She straightened her back. She arranged her face into the expression she had worn every Christmas for 6 years. Pleasant, present, composed. And she walked out of the kitchen. The dining room was full. 18 people settled into their chairs, the way the Reeves family always settled. Loud, comfortable, assuming. The table was long and dark and polished, set with the good china, the tall candles already lit. Richard Sr. was at the head. Patricia was at the other end. The cousins and aunts and uncles filled in the rest, and the noise of it rose easily. The kind of noise that came from people who had eaten at this table their whole lives and never once questioned their place at it. Simone set the collard greens on the buffet table near the wall and looked for her seat. She had stood in a kitchen for 9 hours. Her feet hurt in a way she was ignoring. Her lower back had a dull, steady ache she had been breathing through since noon. She had cooked the bread and the turkey and the 3 sides and the dessert and the appetizers that Patricia had asked about twice before her guests arrived and once after, in the kitchen, with no particular acknowledgement that Simone had made them from scratch. She looked for her seat. There wasn't one. She saw it at the same moment Patricia's voice rose above the noise. "Oh, Simone!" Patricia said it the way she said most things, pleasantly, like she was doing you a favor. She gestured toward the kitchen with one ringed hand. I'm afraid we're a seat short at the main table. You understand. The table didn't go quiet exactly, but something shifted. A few heads turned. One of the cousins, Simone couldn't remember her name, some cousin in from Atlanta, glanced over with a look that was trying to be sympathetic, but mostly just wanted to see what would happen next. Simone stood there with her empty plate. She looked at Douglas. He was already reaching for the dinner rolls. He glanced up at her once, something moving briefly across his face, and then it settled into something easy and unbothered, and he said it the way he might have said, "Pass the salt." "Servants eat in the kitchen, Simone. You know how my mother is about the table arrangement." Laughter. Not everyone, but enough. A small, bright, social laugh. The kind that meant, thank God someone said it, not me. It moved around the table quickly, the way those laughs do, and then it was over, and the dinner rolls were being passed, and someone was asking Richard Sr. something about golf, and the moment was already being folded into the meal and put away. Simone said nothing. She looked at Douglas for exactly one more second. He was already talking to the cousin beside him. She looked at Patricia. Patricia was smiling at something down the table, perfectly composed, the picture of a woman who had managed a lovely Christmas dinner. Simone looked down at her empty plate. She turned around. She walked to the kitchen. The kitchen was quiet. The burners were off. The pots were rinsed and stacked on the drying mat. The counters were clean because she had wiped them that way. The room smelled like food, her food, hours of it, and it was warm, and it was completely empty. She sat down at the small breakfast table in the corner. She put her plate down. She breathed in slowly, through her nose, and then she breathed out. She was not going to cry. Not here, not in this house, not tonight. Not where they would hear it and do the thing people like Patricia always did with other people's pain, which was find a way to make it about themselves. She served herself from the plate she had carried in. Turkey, the greens, a spoonful of stuffing, and she sat in the chair Douglas had occupied that afternoon, the same chair where his phone had been sitting face up on the counter. She ate. And while she ate, something in her went very quiet and very focused, the same way it did at the start of a large job, when there was too much to do to waste time on feelings. A kind of click, a narrowing. She thought about the joint savings account, the one she had been the primary depositor into for 3 years because her business had margins and Douglas's had ideas. She thought about the numbers she had glanced at last month and found lower than she expected. She had assumed it was his consulting expenses. She had assumed. She thought about that. She thought about what it would mean to start looking carefully at the accounts, at the records, at the things she had left to him because she trusted him and because she was busy. She had a lot to do in the next few weeks. The business had 3 New Year's events booked. She had staff to manage and menus to finalize, and a vendor invoice that needed to be disputed before the 1st of January. She could add this to the list. She would add this to the list. She ate the last of her greens, picked up her plate, and washed it at the sink. Later, the family filed out with their coats and their foiled plates of leftovers. Patricia pressed into everyone's arms at the door. Simone stood slightly to the side and said the things you said. "Of course, so glad. Merry Christmas." And no one commented on where she had eaten. The drive home took 40 minutes. Douglas turned the radio on low. She watched the road and thought about the account numbers. 2 days after Christmas, the house was quiet in a way that felt different from peace. Douglas had left that morning for his parents' estate. Something about helping his father with paperwork, he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes when he said it. He'd kissed her on the cheek at the door, a dry, quick press. The kind you give someone you're not thinking about. Simone had stood at the window and watched his car back down the driveway. Then she had made coffee and opened her laptop. She started with a joint checking account. That one was fine. Groceries, utilities, the cable bill, her business insurance auto payment running through as it should. Normal. She almost closed the window. Instead, she clicked over to the joint savings. She sat back slowly. The number on the screen was $14,200. She knew what it should have been. She had deposited $4,000 into this account in October alone, a portion of the profit from a corporate event she had catered for one of Richard Sr.'s clients. In September, she had deposited $3,500. In August, $3,000. She had been building it steadily for 2 years, watching it grow the way you watch something you planted, with patience and a kind of quiet pride. It should have been closer to $31,000. She leaned forward. She pulled up the full transaction history, scrolled back 14 months, and started reading. The withdrawals weren't dramatic. That was the thing. They didn't announce themselves. They were $800 here, $1,200 there, $950 on a Tuesday in March. Transfers. All to the same external account, a routing number she didn't recognize. She counted them. 11 transfers, over 14 months. She opened a fresh notepad document and typed every date and every amount in a clean list. The total came to $16,780. She looked at that number for a long time. The coffee went cold beside her. She called Elijah at 11. "Hey," he said, picking up on the second ring, his voice easy. "Merry late Christmas." "Elijah?" She kept her voice even. "I need help tracing some account transfers. Professional help. I know it's the holidays." A short pause. Not long. Elijah wasn't the kind of person who needed a lot of time to understand tone. "Send me what you have," he said. "I'll look today." She forwarded him the transaction history and the list she'd typed. He called her back in 2 hours. "Okay," he said. She could hear him at a desk, the faint sound of papers. "The routing number traces to a private checking account opened 18 months ago. The name on the account is listed as joint." He paused. "Douglas is one holder. The second holder is a Vanessa Cole." Simone set her hand flat on the kitchen table. "I found something else," Elijah said carefully. "There's an invoice attached to one of the transfer periods. Interior design firm, paid in 2 installments. The billing address on the invoice is an apartment on the east side, not registered to Douglas. The design firm's client of record is Vanessa Cole." He stopped. "Simone, someone furnished an apartment with this money." She knew, even before he said it, what she was hearing. "Okay," she said. "I can dig further if you want. There may be more." "Yes," she said. "Please." She thanked him. She hung up. She sat at the table and looked at her list of numbers. $16,780. She thought about the invoice. She thought about an interior design firm, billing in 2 installments, sending a finished product to an apartment with Vanessa Cole's name on it. She thought about what it meant to accept that, to spend it, to pick out furniture with money that was never yours, from an account a woman you'd never met had been filling for 2 years. Vanessa hadn't been handed anything. She had taken it, without hesitation, without a thought in the world about where it came from. Simone got up, rinsed her cold coffee cup, and stood at the sink for a moment. Then she called Grace. Her sister picked up on the first ring. "Hey, what?" "He's been having an affair," Simone said. The words came out clean and flat, like she was reading them. "I found a text on his phone on Christmas Day. And 2 days ago, I pulled up our joint savings, and he has been moving money into a shared account with her for over a year. She used it to furnish her apartment, Grace. An attorney I trust confirmed it. She knew exactly where the money came from. Silence on the other end. Then, Simone, I'm okay. You are not okay. I'm not falling apart, Simone said, and that part was true. But I needed to say it out loud to someone. Grace's voice went low and very certain. You are coming here, this weekend. You are packing a bag tonight and you are coming here, and we are going to sit down and talk through all of it. Simone looked at the list of numbers still open on her laptop screen. Okay, she said. Tonight, Simone. Okay, she said again. I'll pack a bag. She closed the laptop and went upstairs to the bedroom she shared with Douglas. She pulled her overnight bag down from the top shelf and set it on the bed and started packing. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set. She was not overreacting. She knew that now with the kind of certainty that settled into your bones and stayed. Grace's apartment smelled like coffee and cedar candles. It was small and warm, the kind of place that felt lived in on purpose. Throw blankets on the couch, plants on the windowsill, a stack of unread paperbacks on the kitchen counter with cracked spines. Simone had slept in the guest room and woken up without an alarm for the first time in weeks. She was already at the table when Elijah knocked at 9. Grace let him in, gave him coffee without asking if he wanted it, and quietly disappeared into her bedroom, pulling the door almost shut. That was Grace. She knew when to stay and when to let a room breathe. Elijah sat down across from Simone, set his bag on the floor, and pulled out a folder. He looked at her the way he always did, directly, without pity, the way someone looks at a person they actually respect. I kept digging last night, he said. There's more. Show me. He opened the folder and turned it toward her. Printed pages, clean columns of numbers, a copy of a vendor contract with a logo she didn't recognize at the top. Reeves Logistics has a standing corporate catering agreement, he said. It covered 6 annual events, quarterly leadership dinners, the spring client reception, and the shareholder dinner in late January. According to what I can trace from public records and a source inside the contract's pipeline I've worked with before, that agreement was up for renewal this fall. Simone looked at the logo on the contract copy. Cole Events and Hospitality. Her chest went still. That's Vanessa's family's company, Elijah said. He didn't soften it. The renewal didn't go to Whitfield and Table. It went to them. The switch was approved internally in October. October. She had deposited $4,000 into their joint savings in October, money from a corporate event she'd catered. She had been watching that account grow, patient, proud. In October, someone had already taken the next thing from her. Vanessa is a director at Reeves Logistics, Elijah continued. Her role gives her a voice in vendor selection. According to internal communications my source was able to share, she personally advocated for the switch in a department meeting. Her justification was that Cole Events offered better rates. He paused. She never disclosed that she had a personal connection to the firm, or to anyone in the Reeves family. Simone turned the page. There was a printed email chain. Vanessa's name at the top, professional and clean, presenting numbers in a tidy comparison. Better rates, streamlined service, a trusted regional vendor. No mention of whose family owned it, no mention of Douglas. She sat in a meeting at his father's company, Simone said. Her voice was quiet. And she made a business case for cutting my contract and giving it to her own family's firm. Yes. While she was sleeping with my husband. Yes. Simone set the email chain back on the table. She pressed her fingertips flat against the paper for a moment, then let go. There's one more thing, Elijah said. He hesitated, just a beat, long enough for her to notice. Tell me. I spoke with someone who's known Douglas's family for a long time. I asked a few careful questions. He looked at her steadily. Patricia has known about Vanessa for at least 4 months. She found out in August. She didn't say a word to you." The room was quiet. August. Simone thought about August. She thought about the Labor Day cookout at the estate, the one she'd catered herself, spent 2 days preparing, stood in Patricia's kitchen and arranged charcuterie boards, while Patricia stood in the doorway and said, "You really do have a gift for this, Simone. It's such a practical skill." Patricia had smiled at her, had accepted a plate from her hands, and she had known. Simone sat very still and let all of it settle into place. The affair, the money, the contract, the 4 months Patricia had spent looking her in the eye without saying a single word. It wasn't just Douglas. It had never been just Douglas. This had been a quiet, multi-layered dismantling of her marriage and her business at the same time, and the people responsible had all been counting on one thing: that she wouldn't look closely enough to see the shape of it. She picked up the folder and paged through it slowly, from the beginning. "She overreached," Simone said, almost to herself. "Vanessa?" "She got the contract in October. She didn't stop there." She tapped the last page, the Cole Events invoice, the one Elijah had traced from the most recent transfer period. "She took the money. She took the contract. And if I know anything about people who move like that, she's already pushing for more." She closed the folder. "That's going to matter." She looked up at Elijah. "I need to start rebuilding relationships directly with Richard's biggest clients, the ones I've worked with through his events, before I do anything else." He nodded slowly. "The catering connections. They know me," she said. "They've eaten my food at his table for 3 years. That's where I start." She thanked Elijah just before noon. He packed up his folder, paused at the door. "Take whatever time you need," he said. "I don't need much," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded once and left. That evening, Simone drove home. She pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the dark car. The house lights were on. Douglas was inside. She picked up her bag, walked to the front door, and went in. Douglas was standing in the kitchen doorway when she came in. He was holding flowers, yellow tulips, still wrapped in the plastic sleeve from a gas station or a grocery store. She couldn't tell which, and it didn't matter. He had one hand in his pocket and his jaw set at the particular angle he always used when he was trying to look casual and wasn't. "Hey," he said, "I was starting to wonder when you'd be back." "I told you I was at Grace's." "Right." He pushed off the door frame and held out the flowers. "These are for you." Simone took them. They were a little wilted at the edges. She carried them to the sink, filled a glass with water, and set the stems in it without saying anything. "Look," Douglas said from behind her. "Christmas was a lot. I know it was. My mother can be—" He exhaled. "She's a lot to deal with. You know how she gets about things like the table." Simone turned around and leaned against the counter. "She means well," he said. She watched him. He was looking somewhere just past her shoulder, the way he always did when he was saying something he hadn't fully decided to believe yet. This wasn't a confession. It wasn't even close to an apology. It was a paragraph he had rehearsed in the car, and the most honest part of it was that he had only rehearsed one. "I hear you," Simone said. "She just has her way of doing things." "I know." He relaxed slightly. His shoulders dropped. She had given him the right answer, and he was relieved in the way a person gets relieved when they've been let off a hook they didn't even know they were dangling from. "I've also been thinking," he said. He sat down at the kitchen table, casual, like they were about to discuss weekend plans. "About the business, about Whitfield and Table." Simone folded her hands in front of her. "You've been running yourself into the ground this season. 3 events last weekend, all that prep at Christmas on top of it?" He shook his head. "It's not sustainable, Simone. And honestly, I think it might be good for us if you pulled back a little, took on fewer contracts, smaller scale. We don't need you working at that level." "We don't need you working at that level." She let the sentence land, let it sit right there on the kitchen floor between them. "That's something to think about," she said. "I'm serious." He was warming to it now. "The stress bleeds into everything, into us. If we're going to work on this marriage, I think we both need to make some sacrifices. You could consult part-time, keep a few regular clients, something more manageable." "I understand what you're saying," she said. And she did. She understood it completely. He had just watched his father's biggest events contract quietly move to another firm, sat next to the woman who engineered it, and was now standing in Simone's kitchen, suggesting she shrink herself down to something that couldn't compete with anyone. The audacity of it wasn't even surprising anymore. It was just clarifying. "Good," he nodded. He looked relieved again. "I think that's the right move." She picked up her bag from the counter. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm going to bed." "Sure." He reached over and squeezed her arm once as she passed. "We'll talk more this week." She went upstairs. She did not look back. In the days that followed, she worked. Quietly, steadily. She pulled up every contact she had built through Richard Sr.'s events over the past 3 years. The corporate clients who had shaken her hand at his quarterly dinners, the executives who had asked for her card at the spring reception, the ones who had emailed her afterward to say the food was exceptional. She had a list of 14 names. She started making calls. She didn't pitch hard. She didn't need to. She asked how their January was shaping up. She mentioned she was expanding Whitfield and Table's corporate event offerings in the new year. She let them remember her, and most of them did, readily, warmly, because they had eaten her food at Richard Reeves's table, and it had been worth remembering. On the third day, a contact named Marcus Webb, VP of Operations at one of Reeves' logistics anchor clients, mentioned something in passing. "Funny you should call," he said. "We just got a pitch from another firm, Cole Events. Said they were the preferred vendor for Reeves now, pushing for our annual conference." Simone kept her voice even. "Is that right?" "Seemed like a reach," Marcus said. "They don't have your track record with our volume." She made a note on her legal pad. Cole Events, pitching external clients, using Reeves' relationship as credential. She had been right. Vanessa had gotten the contract in October and hadn't stopped. Now she was using the Reeves name as leverage to pull in clients that had nothing to do with the family company. She was overreaching in every direction she could, stacking wins before anyone thought to look at her hand. That was going to matter. Simone finished the call with Marcus, sent him a formal proposal by end of day, and that evening drafted a short, professional email to Richard Reeves Sr. She told him she wanted to discuss logistics for catering the upcoming shareholder dinner, a dinner she'd worked before and knew well. She kept it brief and businesslike, 1 paragraph. His assistant replied within the hour. "Mr. Reeves is available Thursday at 2. Does that work?" Simone typed back. "Thursday at 2 is perfect. Thank you." Richard Reeves Sr.'s office was on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like polished wood and old money. Not flashy, not the kind of office that tried to impress you, the kind that simply expected you to already know it was impressive. Simone had been here twice before, both times to go over event logistics, both times shown to a side conference room. This time, his assistant brought her directly to his office. That was different. She noted it and said nothing about it. Richard was standing at the window when she came in. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had been handsome once and had aged into something harder and more certain. He shook her hand the way he always did, firm, no ceremony. "Simone?" He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." She sat. She placed her portfolio on her lap and her bag beside her feet. She was wearing a dark blue blazer and her best flat shoes, and she had slept 7 full hours the night before, which had taken effort, but she had done it on purpose. "Shareholder dinner," he said, sitting down. "You've done it before. I don't imagine it's changed much." "The format is the same," she said. 42 guests, sit-down service, 4 courses. I wanted to confirm the dietary restrictions list and walk through the kitchen access timing with your venue coordinator." They spent 12 minutes on that. Simone had a printed menu draft, 2 alternatives for one of the courses, and a question about the loading dock schedule. Richard answered everything without looking at notes, because he knew his own building, and she had expected that. When the catering conversation reached its natural end, she did not rush the next part. She let a beat pass. A professional beat, the kind that happens between topics in a business meeting, when someone is about to say one more thing. "There's something else I'd like to bring to your attention," she said. "Before the dinner. I think it matters that you have it beforehand, not after." Richard looked at her steadily. He was not a man who got rattled by a sentence. He just listened. She opened her portfolio and placed 3 documents on his desk, clean copies, each one labeled at the top. "In October," she said, "Reeves Logistics moved its primary catering and event services contract to Cole Events. That's a firm owned by Martin and Ruth Cole." She paused. "Their daughter is Vanessa Cole. She's a director here." Richard's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "This is the internal communications record from that period," Simone continued, tapping the first page. "It shows that Vanessa Cole was the primary advocate for the switch. She cited rate differences. What it doesn't show, and what isn't in any of those communications, is her personal relationship with the Coles business, or the fact that the contract would directly benefit her family's firm." She moved to the second document. "This is Cole Events' current client list, which they've made partially public as part of their marketing. They are now pitching several of your anchor clients externally, using the Reeves vendor relationship as a credential. I became aware of this through my own client network in the past 2 weeks." She set the third document beside the others. "This is a summary of Cole Events' bid activity across those clients, with dates." Richard picked up the first page. He read it, then the second. He didn't read fast. He read like a man who intended to understand what he was looking at. "This is a conflict of interest," he said. "It wasn't a question." "That's how it reads to me," Simone said. "I'm not a lawyer, but I thought you'd want the information before you're seated across from your board." He set the pages down. He looked at her. "You've had this for how long?" "I've been verifying it carefully," she said. "I didn't want to bring you something incomplete." That was the only answer she gave him on timing, and she gave it evenly, and he accepted it. "I appreciate your discretion," he said. "On all of it." "This is your company," Simone said simply. "You built it. You should know what's happening in it." Richard was quiet for a moment. He looked at the documents again, then back at her. "I'll look into this properly before the dinner," he said. His voice had gone quieter, flatter, the tone of a man shifting from a conversation into something more like a decision. "I'll want my legal team to review it." "Of course," Simone said. She gathered her portfolio, placed her menu draft on his desk, and stood. "The venue coordinator's name is Denise," she said. "I'll follow up with her today to lock in the loading access window. Everything will be ready." "I know it will," Richard said. He walked her to the door himself. He didn't have to do that. She didn't mention it. Outside, the cold hit her face the moment she pushed through the building's front doors. She walked to her car, unlocked it, and sat inside for exactly 1 minute before she started the engine. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her heart was not racing. The shareholder dinner was in 7 days. Everything she needed to do before then, she already had a list for. She pulled out of the parking garage and headed toward the venue to meet Denise. The venue was a converted ballroom on the 3rd floor of the Hartwell Club. High ceilings, dark wood panels, white linen on every table. The kind of room that made people feel important just by being inside it. Simone had been there since 4 in the afternoon. By the time the first guests arrived at 7, her staff had the kitchen running cleanly, the past appetizers circulating on schedule, and every place setting measured to the same distance from the table's edge. She had trained her team well. They moved without being told twice. She wore her uniform. Black jacket, white shirt, her name embroidered small on the left breast pocket. Whitfield and Table. She had chosen that detail herself years ago. Tonight, she was glad she had. She stayed visible. That was intentional. She was there when Richard Sr. arrived with the board members. She was there when Douglas walked in with 2 colleagues, adjusting his tie, scanning the room with the comfortable ease of a man who thought the evening held no surprises for him. He saw her. He nodded once, the small, distracted nod he gave when he expected her to stay in the background. She nodded back, gave him nothing else. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later in a deep green dress, confident, laughing at something her colleague said as she came through the door. She moved through the room the way ambitious people do, making sure to be seen, making sure to speak to the right people. She said something to Douglas near the bar. He smiled. He kept the smile small and discreet, but Simone saw it. She turned and went back to the kitchen to check the first course. Richard Sr. gave his remarks at 8:15, between the first and second courses. Simone stood near the kitchen door, close enough to hear, far enough back to be unremarkable. He thanked the board. He spoke briefly about the company's quarter. He was not a man who wasted words, and he didn't waste them now. Then his tone shifted, not dramatically, just slightly flatter, more deliberate, the same tone Simone had heard in his office a week ago. "I also want to address something directly," he said. "Reeves Logistics is making an immediate change to our vendor relationships. Cole Events is being terminated as a contracted vendor, effective tonight, following a review that identified a conflict of interest in how that contract was awarded." The room went very still. "Additionally," Richard continued, "the conduct of one of our directors in relation to that contract is currently under review by our HR and legal teams. We'll be handling that process through the appropriate internal channels." He moved on to the next topic without pause. Simone watched Vanessa's face from across the room. The color didn't drain from it all at once. It happened in stages. First, the stillness, the frozen second of not understanding. Then, the understanding. Vanessa's eyes moved to Richard, then to the board members seated near him, then, involuntarily, briefly, to Douglas. She had pushed for the larger contract 6 weeks ago. She had been so certain of her position. That certainty was visible on her face right now, cracking open into something else entirely. Douglas had gone still, too. He was looking at his father with an expression Simone had never seen on him before. Not anger, not confusion. Something closer to a man who has just realized the floor beneath him is not as solid as he thought. He looked around the room slowly. Then his eyes found Simone. She met his gaze, held it for 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the back hallway that led to the private dining alcove, a narrow, quiet corridor away from the main room. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. She gave it 4 minutes, long enough for Douglas to understand her meaning, long enough for him to find Patricia and bring her along. They both came. The alcove was dim, lit only by a single wall sconce. Patricia arrived first, then Douglas behind her. Neither of them spoke immediately. Simone stood with her hands at her sides. "I know about Vanessa," she said. Her voice was low and level. "I know about every transfer out of our joint savings. I know what it paid for. And I know she used her position at this company to take a contract away from my business while you all kept inviting me to cook for your family." Douglas opened his mouth. "Don't," she said simply, not loud, just firm. Patricia's chin lifted slightly. Old habit. Control through posture. "Simone, this isn't the place." "You knew," Simone said, turning her gaze to Patricia. "You knew for months. You sat at that Christmas table and you let your son call me a servant." She paused. "I just thought you should know that everything that happened out there tonight, that came from choices you made. Not luck, not coincidence. Yours." Neither of them said anything. Douglas looked smaller than she had ever seen him look. Patricia's composure was intact, but only just, the way a wall looks intact right before the crack runs all the way through. Simone straightened her jacket. "Excuse me," she said. "I have a dinner to run." She walked back down the hallway, through the kitchen door, and picked up her radio to check on the second course. Her staff was on schedule. The food was perfect. Behind her, the alcove was silent. The Monday after the shareholder dinner, Douglas got called into his father's office. Simone heard about it from Elijah, who heard it from a contact at the company. Richard Sr. had been brief and direct, the way he always was. Douglas would no longer be leading the Pacific Northwest expansion. His VP title remained, but the responsibilities that came with it, the travel, the client meetings, the decisions, those were quietly reassigned to someone else. No announcement, no public humiliation, just a door closing. In Richard Sr.'s world, that was worse. 3 days after the dinner, Simone sat across from Elijah at his office on Fletcher Street. The radiator ticked against the wall. Outside, the city was gray and cold, the kind of January cold that made everything feel stripped down to what it actually was. Elijah had the documents ready. He walked her through each one: the joint savings, the joint checking, the investment account Douglas's name was on. She signed where he told her to sign. She didn't hesitate. By noon, Douglas's access to every shared account had been frozen. He called her that afternoon, twice. She let it go to voicemail. The second message was longer. Confused at first, then frustrated, the specific frustration of a man who has never had to count anything in his life and was only now beginning to understand that he would have to start. She listened to it once, then she deleted it. HR's findings came through the following week. Elijah showed her the summary. Not the full report, which was internal, but enough to confirm what they already knew. The review concluded that Vanessa had used her director-level position to advocate for a vendor contract awarded to her family's firm without disclosing her relationship with a company executive's spouse. The classification was clear: a conflict of interest, a breach of the company's ethics policy. She was terminated without severance, effective immediately. The industry Vanessa worked in was not large. Corporate events, catering networks, logistics vendor relationships. These were circles where people knew each other, talked to each other, compared notes. The ethics finding didn't stay contained. It moved the way these things do, quietly and thoroughly, from one conversation to the next. Within 2 weeks, Vanessa's name was attached to the story in the minds of people who mattered to her future. Not loudly, but there. Cole Events, her family's firm, had built its recent growth almost entirely on the Reeves Logistics contract. When that contract ended, it didn't just slow things down. It pulled a structural beam from the whole building. They let 3 staff members go in January, 2 more in February. Simone learned about the family dinner secondhand, a detail Grace had picked up from a mutual contact who knew someone close to the Coles. Vanessa's father had called her home for dinner. He'd sat across from her at the table she grew up eating at and told her, in plain terms, what her decisions had cost the business he'd spent 20 years building. What it had cost the people who worked for him. No raised voice, by all accounts. Just quiet, heavy disappointment. The kind that doesn't lift. Simone thought about that for a moment when she heard it. Then she moved on. Douglas and Vanessa were done by mid-February. There was nothing dramatic to report. No final argument anyone witnessed. Just 2 people whose connection had been built on money that was no longer flowing, and a professional alliance that no longer existed. Without those things, there wasn't much underneath. Grace said it plainly when Simone told her, "There's nothing sadder than watching 2 people realize they only liked each other's circumstances." Simone didn't disagree. The family gathering was at Patricia's house, Richard Sr.'s birthday, late February, a small dinner for close relatives. Simone came because she hadn't yet filed, because she wasn't finished. She arrived composed, in a deep navy dress, and helped herself to a drink from the sideboard like she belonged there, which she did. Patricia found her near the end of the evening, just as dessert was being cleared, in the front sitting room where 3 of Douglas's aunts and 2 cousins were still finishing their wine, the same cluster of relatives who had been at the Christmas table, who had laughed. Patricia's voice was warm in the way that meant she was performing. "Simone, I was hoping we could talk. I know things have been difficult, and I think—" "No," Simone said. One word. Quiet, clear, and final. Patricia blinked. "I'm only trying to—" "I heard you the first time," Simone said. "The answer is still no." The sitting room had gone still. Every aunt, every cousin. The same silence that had followed her out of the dining room at Christmas. Only this time, it settled on Patricia. She stood in it, her composure thinning at the edges, no script left to reach for. Simone set her glass down on the sideboard, unhurried. She said goodnight to the room, not to Patricia specifically, and walked to the front door. She filed for divorce the next morning. Elijah's referral, a family law attorney named Carol Marsh, walked her through the paperwork at a small desk in a quiet office. Simone signed her name clearly on every page. Simone Whitfield. Her name, the one she'd been born with. She drove home alone afterward. The city was pale and bright with late winter sun. She parked in her own driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet of the car, hands loose in her lap. She wasn't sad. She wasn't angry. She was done. The sign on the door was simple, black letters on brushed brass. Whitfield and Table. Her name first, the way it had always been in her head, even during the years she'd answered to something else. Simone stood in the doorway of her studio on a Friday evening in December and looked at it the way she sometimes still did, not with surprise anymore, but with a quiet kind of recognition, like seeing her own face in a mirror and actually seeing it, not just checking. She stepped inside. The space had been a dry storage warehouse 18 months ago. Concrete floors, high ceilings, a loading dock in the back that still worked better than any kitchen she'd ever rented. She'd signed the lease in March, 2 months after filing the divorce papers, when the settlement money was confirmed and her corporate contract roster had grown large enough that working out of a shared commercial kitchen no longer made sense. The renovation had taken 4 months. She'd overseen every decision. Now, the front room held a long farm table, 12 chairs, a sideboard she'd found at an estate sale and refinished herself. String lights ran the length of the ceiling beams. In the back, through the wide pass-through window, the kitchen gleamed, stainless steel and clean lines, organized exactly the way her mind worked. Her staff had left 2 hours ago, prep complete. The brisket was resting, the roasted vegetables were timed. 3 pies cooled on the rack near the window. She had this hour to herself, and she'd learned to take it. The past year had moved the way good years do, forward, steadily, with enough weight to feel real. The relationship with Richard Sr.'s corporate network had opened after the shareholder dinner, in the way she'd expected, but still felt the full force of when it happened. His 3 largest client companies had reached out within the first quarter, 2 more followed by spring. These weren't small holiday bookings. They were quarterly board dinners, annual retreats, full-service contracts with year-round schedules that required staff, structure, and the kind of operational precision Simone had been running quietly for years, without anyone calling it that. She'd hired 4 new people, promoted 2 who'd been with her from the beginning. Whitfield and Table had been her business before. Now it was a company. She thought about Douglas sometimes, less than she'd expected, and differently than she'd imagined. Not with anger, not with grief, more the way you might think about a road you used to drive before they rerouted the highway. It was there, she'd used it, it didn't go anywhere she needed to be anymore. His father had called her once, in April, brief and businesslike, the way he always was. He'd told her he respected what she'd built, and that he hoped she knew the door to his network was open on her merits, not out of any sense of obligation. She'd thanked him, meant it, and kept the conversation to 4 minutes. That was enough. That was actually exactly right. She heard the knock at 6:15, exactly when she'd said. Grace came in first, the way Grace always did, loud enough for 2 people, unwrapping her scarf before she'd fully cleared the doorway, already talking. "It smells incredible in here." She stopped in the middle of the front room and turned a slow circle, taking in the lights, the table, the flickering candles Simone had set at the center. Okay, this is yours. This is completely yours." "I know," Simone said and hugged her. Others came in behind her. Diane and Priya from the Thursday farmers market circuit they'd all started attending in October, Marcus, who'd done her studio photography for the new website, Kezia, who'd been her very first hire at Whitfield and Table 7 years ago, back when the whole business was a rented van and a prayer. The room filled. Voices overlapped. Someone put music on. The good kind, low and warm. Elijah arrived at 6:30, knocking even though the door was open, which was exactly the kind of thing he did. He came in holding a bottle of wine she hadn't asked for, and wearing the gray coat she'd told him once looked good on him. "You found it," she said. Almost went to the old address, he said. Then I remembered you have a sign now. I have a sign now, she agreed. He looked at her for a moment, not searching for anything, just looking, and she felt the quiet steadiness of him the same way she always did. He'd never pushed, not once in all of it. She'd been the one to reach for this, in her own time, when she was ready, and that made it mean something entirely different than anything she'd held before. She took the wine and led him inside. At 7 o'clock, Simone carried the brisket to the table herself. Her table. The one she'd chosen, in the room she'd built, in the building she'd signed her name on. She set the platter down, looked at the faces around it. Grace already talking, Elijah listening, Kezia laughing at something Marcus had said, and she took her seat at the head. No one had told her where to sit. No one ever would again. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!